problem. Now down here in your femorals, that's a problem too, because the femorals break off of what's called your aorta, which comes off of the heart down through here, and then it bifurcates or it splits and then goes down your legs. This is a big deal. You'll die within 45 seconds if you cut a femoral artery, okay? So depending on how bad the cut is, but you can die as fast as 45 seconds. So that's the difference. The other difference is if it's in a small area and you can't see the actual squirting, or if it's covered in dirt or whatever, arterial bleeds tend to be very bright red. Bloods that are venous tend to be kind of a dull reddish brown. Okay, so that's the other thing. Venous cuts tend to just kind of ooze out. Arterial cuts flow pretty freely until either the body can clot, which usually it can't because of the pressure behind the clot can't set, or until you stop it yourself with direct pressure. Yes, ma'am?
So what would inspire the use of the tourniquet? I know it has to be a pretty severe situation, right?
It is a pretty severe situation. Here's the thing about tourniquets. For a lot of years, we've taught people not to use them. They're dangerous. It's life over limb. We're learning, based on military studies, because that's where all medical advancements come from, is our poor soldiers. That's where we do it at. We can leave tourniquets on for 8, 9, 10 hours, and people come out without any deficits or any, lifelong tissue issues. Does that make sense? So, yes, sir.
I've been carrying these anticoagulant.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. Right here. Yeah, these are fantastic. These are wonderful. They have a new type that's called a Z-roll. If you guys have an opportunity to get that, especially if you can get it through your work, it's way better because sponges are really hard to get inside the abdomen. But Z-roll, it comes, and the only reason it's called a Z-roll is because it's wrapped like a Z. So you just grab it and you just start stuffing it inside the wound, and it like accordions in with it, and so you get more coverage that way. So this gentleman's question, everybody can buy this at Walgreens, or I'm going to tell you Amazon because that's what I do. This comes with the material. Again, this was actually found out by the Israel's military. They started using this years ago, and now we're using it over here. That has an agent, primarily lava ash is the primary agent in that. But what this does, and we're talking about arterial bleeds, is this inhibits the body's ability to form a clot. So it helps very much in stopping bleeding. Now, the type of bandage that it is, or that you use when this, is based upon the type of wound. This is a small sponge, so I wouldn't use this sponge for somebody who was shot with a 30-06. You see what I'm saying? Because that's not going to be near big enough. If they were peppered with a shotgun, like a 12 gauge, from me to Shad, that's probably going to work. It's going to hurt like heck because I'm jamming it in, but it'll work well. If you have somebody who gets a cut on their wrist and it's arterial, you just put it right on top and you just wrap gauze or Curlex or Coban. You guys probably have Coban. What do you guys call Coban? I call it Coban. Vet wrap. Thank you. I call it Coban. It's all the same stuff. So vet wrap will work well. These things are amazing, and you're absolutely right. That's right on for carrying it with you. They do a really good job. You can also get it in a powder form to where you pour it in and then you just stuff gauze straight into that. And you just leave it there. You put pressure on it. You hold it for about 5 or 10 minutes. This is just regular gauze. That's all this is. And so you would put that in and then you would wrap it with this. But you put pressure on it for about 5 to 10 minutes. Don't let go until you're sure that bleeding stopped. Okay? Because here's the thing about clots, and we'll cover tourniquets too. This is also true of tourniquets or anytime you're stopping bleeding. The first clot's always the best clot. And it is so, so hard to get it back. It's better to wait that extra 2 or 3 minutes if you're not sure than to prematurely remove your wrapping to see if you stop the bleeding. And then they throw that clot. It's almost impossible to get the second one back. You're pretty much guaranteeing that you're moving to a tourniquet. But if it's, say a steer gets somebody in the abdomen, you can't tourniquet that. There's nothing you can do about that except start stuffing that stomach with sterile coagulants, anti-clotting coagulants that are passing around somewhere. That's the best thing you can do for that person. If you don't have this stuff, that's fine. Use whatever. You guys have first aid kits? Anybody aware? That's the thing about emergencies is we never think about it until it's there. Get a first aid kit just because truly that's going to save a life. I mean, it absolutely will. It might be your own. I had to do something for our school system here because the bus drivers have to be certified in CPR and first aid. And so I told them, bring all of your first aid kits. And every one of them brought their first aid kits, but not one of them was allowed to open it to know. If you guys have kids in schools, understand this. The bus driver cannot open the first aid kit, so they don't even know what's in there. They don't have a clue what's in. I didn't know because they can't open it. Apparently, if they open it, it breaks a little seal, and when that seal's broken, the kit's invalid and they can't use it. So they didn't know what was in there. So if you guys have first aid kits in your trucks, your vehicles, whatever for work, get familiar with it. Know where it's at before you need it. And here's why. When we have an emergency, does anybody know the very first thing that our body does when we have an emergency? We shed our ability to think at a higher level. That's the very first thing that happens. Then we start dumping endorphins. At that point, if it's truly an emergency, say it's, picture your own loved one, it's truly an emergency, you at that point, at that second, can no longer function at a higher level. And you will fall back to muscle memory. If you don't know what's in your first aid kit, you will look and look and look and look when your loved one's lying there dying and bleeding to death, and you will never find what's right in front of you because you didn't know it was there. And at that point, you can't find out that it's there. I can't tell you countless scenes that I've been on where I've had family members on the freeway, because I've worked from Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Espanola, and Ruidoso. Those are all the areas that I work, and whether it's working on trucks or doing administrative stuff. Countless wrecks where, say, your brother dies in a crash. You roll up on it. My hand to God, countless times I've had brothers walk up, step over their dead brother's body, and ask me, where's my brother? They can't see it. The way our brain works is when we're in a stressful situation, when we're in an emergency, we lose the ability to think at a higher level. We cannot register. Has anybody been in a car wreck before? Even rolled a vehicle, even better? Do you remember, did this happen to you when things were happening? Did everything slow down? Yeah? The reason that happens is because our brain can't register something that it doesn't understand. So it's slowing that moment down. While it's doing that, it's searching, trying to find, where does this fit? What have I had happen to me before that I can relate this to? If you guys ever in a car wreck, if you ever roll your vehicle, you'll know this. You'll remember this moment. Right now, me telling you this when this happens. You'll look up and say you have a spittoon or a Coke or whatever. It's going so slow you could just reach out and grab it. But in real time, it's not. But the way your brain registers it, everything slows down. Because if it's not familiar, if it's not something it's used to, it stops because it's trying to figure out how to make sense of what's going on. Yeah, you don't know what to do. That's what we're here to help. Try to stop right now. Nobody's expecting much, just basic beginner's knowledge. This isn't first responder. This isn't EMS. This isn't anything like that. Okay, this is simply stop the bleed. Put something on. There's a few bloodborne pathogens you want to be considerate of. All of your hepatitis. I know everybody knows about hepatitis A, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. Truthfully, we're up to like hepatitis Q, and we don't even know how to deal with A, B, and C. So understand that's a bloodborne pathogen. You don't want somebody's blood getting in broken skin, broken cuts, open cuts, sores, in your eyes, any mucosal membranes, in your mouth, anywhere like that, okay? Because hep is a big deal. HIV is also another big deal, but the thing is about HIV is that it lives for less than 10 seconds outside of the body. That's the lifespan of HIV outside of the body. Hep will live for days and days and days and days. So yeah, HIV is a concern. It's a big deal. But if the blood's dried, very, very, very low possibility of you actually contracting HIV, or if it's been out for more than 10 seconds. With hep, that's not the case. Hep is always contagious. Yes, sir?
So, I used to sell animal health, and a lot of my producers would have bloodstock powder.
They would have what? I'm sorry?
Bloodstock powder.
Yeah. Yeah, uh-huh.
So, would that be safe to use on a human in an emergency situation?
I would tell you this much in the most unofficial capacity that I can. If I had to, I would. My concern would be, is it necrotic to the tissue you're pouring it in? Because a lot of things, hydrogen peroxide, for example, is great for surface injuries, but if it gets on the brain, it never stops eating. I don't know if you guys know that or not. But so depending on what the powder is made of, what's that?
Should be on the warning label.
Yeah, not for human consumption, right?
Well, it's going to have that anyway.
Yeah, no matter what, because it's vet, I get it. If it's a life or death situation and it was me and it was my kid or my wife, I'm going to do what I have to do to at least try. That being said, it's not certainly anything I would ever recommend. I wouldn't say keep that in your first aid kit. I would tell you to get the ones that are intended for humans. And they're cheap. They're like, I think that sponge that's going around, it's like $6. You know, you can buy them bigger and smaller and the whole deal, but none of this stuff is expensive at all. But that's a great question. So does everybody know how to find a pulse and where to look? Yep, that's one place. Do you guys mind partnering up into twos and we'll find pulses? Just to make sure everybody knows what we're looking for is in your neck, that's called your carotid, and at your wrist, that's called your radial. Thumb side, okay? The radial bone, or your radius, is on the thumb side, okay? That's where your radial artery is. And then carotid is left or right, doesn't matter. But you guys try to find them. Good job. Find it in your partner, yeah. So group up and find it. Because we need to know so we can put tourniquets on. Can you find it? Yeah, what is it? So count. Okay, you count how many times it is, and I'll tell you when to stop. So you ready? You got it? You tell me when you got it.
8.
Okay, you got it. Okay, but I'll tell you when to stop. Do you have it? You found it now? Okay. Ready, go.
Got it.
How many was it?
7.
It was 7 times. So I actually only went 7 seconds. So we're going to say 1 a second, roughly, and say that he's 10. So what you do is 60 to 100 is normal for an adult, okay? So I counted 10 seconds while you counted his pulse, and he was at 10. So you just multiply 10 times 6, and that's 60. So you're in a perfectly normal range. If you're a healthy guy, if you're at 50, 54, don't freak out. It's not a big deal, okay? People, believe me, people call 911 because they cut themselves shaving. So is everybody able to find their pulse and their partner's pulse? It's easy to find your own. It's harder to find it on somebody else. On you, you can always find it. On somebody else, it's a little more difficult because you don't have as many senses functioning for you. Is everybody good? So you take that, the way you calculate a pulse, for an adult, a normal pulse rate is 60 to 100 beats a minute. So we always just go to 10 seconds and then multiply that number by 6. You can do whatever you want. You can hold it for the entire 60 seconds, go to 30 seconds, multiply by 2, 5 and 15, I don't care, whatever you want. So, but the point is we want 60 to 100 beats a minute. Now, if it's somebody who's been outside working all day and they haven't been drinking water, expect their pulse to be high because they're dehydrated, their body's trying to cool down, they have a lack of blood, for example, for this argument's sake. And so the heart's having to work harder to maintain a process called homeostasis, which means to keep things in normal function, okay? Altitude has a very big impact, primarily on dehydration though, and it can also affect your lungs and your respiratory status. So, but yes, it does have an impact, yes. So the more dehydrated you are, the higher your blood pressure is, the faster your heart's going to beat, and the more ill you're going to become. An ounce a pound is a good rule to live by. An ounce a pound or an ounce a kilogram, okay? Whatever you guys prefer, even though it's doubled. So kilograms, everybody know how to get kilograms from pounds? It's divided by 2.2. So if you weigh 100 kilograms or 100 kigs, you would weigh approximately 220 pounds. Okay? So if you did an ounce a kilogram and you weigh 200 pounds, 220 pounds, you should be drinking an ounce of water, 100 ounces of water every single day. And I mean water, not Gatorade, not orange juice, not tea, not coffee, clear from the ground water. We don't have to add Crystal Light or anything else, just water. Not beer. Do that after you drink plenty of water. And then if you drink 16 ounces in between beers, you don't get a hangover. So that's where we're at with that. So this is a tourniquet, you guys. There's all kinds of fancy names for tourniquets from various companies. Bottom line, this is a tourniquet. This is a commercial tourniquet. You can make one with almost anything, and I'll show you how. But this tourniquet's designed to fit from the thigh to the shoulder. Okay, so this will go around my thigh. If I cut my femoral here, this will go around my thigh and stop the bleeding, below the injured extremity, or it'll get small enough to go around my upper arm. So the way we put a tourniquet on, can I have a volunteer? Anybody? Somebody stand up here? Oh, wonderful. So when you see people put on tourniquets, have you ever seen one in real life? Or anybody ever even used one? Thank you very much, sir. They're not this horrible, it's not this horrible process. If you know where the pulse is, this is where you're going to put your tourniquet. So let's say this officer had an arterial cut somewhere here crossing up into the radial, and he's bleeding, and we're out here. So I get here and I try and I can't stop it. And he looks like he's going into shock and he's getting pale and diaphoretic, pale and sweaty and the whole deal. I'm going to go to a tourniquet because I know it's what he needs right now. So since I know his brachial pulse is right here, can everybody see my fingers? That's his pulse. That's what's called a pulse point. So the blood that he's losing out of his arm down here is being piped right here. So I know this. So I'm going to take my tourniquet and I'm going to put it on him, and we're going to just stop the circulation. So since I know that, these tourniquets have this little, what do you want to call that, leverage point, and that's how we're actually going to tighten the tourniquet. So I want to put it about where his brachial artery is, and then I just tighten it down. I know where his pulse is, okay, so I'm feeling his pulse, and I know my tourniquet works when his pulse is gone. And he's pretty muscular, so it's going to take a little bit more on him, but it still is the same process. Once you get your tourniquet strapped on tight, not so tight that you're hurting his tissue, okay, you're just going to turn this, and right there, he no longer has blood going down to this part of his arm. If I was to leave this on here, he's going to, can you feel it?
I can already feel it.
Yeah, he's going to start tingling and the whole deal. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to leave it on here, but hypothetically, I could leave it on for 10 hours. He's going to want to kick my teeth down my throat because it's going to hurt like heck before I take it off. But, which I wouldn't take off. But, thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. So you don't release it at all during the phone?
Never, ever, ever. That's actually what we're fixing to cover, and I'll tell you the reasons why. Thank you so much. You never, if you go to the step that you're going to put a tourniquet on, there is not a situation you will come across where you have to take it off or you put it on at the wrong time. Never take your tourniquet off. The doctor takes the tourniquet off, period. Okay? And that's because there's no clot like the first clot. You take off this tourniquet and it throws that clot, you're not going to get that tourniquet to seat again. It's not going to happen. I don't know why. I don't know if the body adapts or what. But once you get that pressure stopped and that bleeding is no longer, don't remove your tourniquet. Okay? If you're at the point that you're putting a tourniquet on, there should be an ambulance, on the way. We might get there and replace it with ours, but we're not going to take yours off and then put ours on. We're going to put ours on, make sure it's good and secured, and then we're going to take yours off, if that makes sense. Because ours is going to be designed for that use, where you guys might be just using something like this and your pen, if you have a pen in your pocket, or your knife, okay? This will do the same thing, but the problem is this is going to twist and get really tight. Like anything else, it's going to cut into them. And it will work, and if you have to use it, then use it. However, it causes a lot of damage locally to the tissue, okay? So we would get there, and if you had something like this on, then this is just a splint. This is just a triangle bandage that every first aid kit in the world has, okay? But if you have something like this on, we're going to put our tourniquet on because it's designed with a wider base, and it has supports on the sides. You can pass that around to prevent that type of tissue damage, okay? So with this, it's not that hard. You just want to fold it up and get it as flat as you can, but remember, you're in an emergency. So about like this, okay? Can I use you for a minute? I'm not going to tighten you up or anything. So then I'm going to put it around this guy. What's your name?
Scott.
Scott, thanks, Scott. So I'm going to put it around Scott right here. But again, I know I'm going to the brachial. So when I put this around Scott, you got a pin right there, huh? So we're going to put this around Scott. And let's just pretend he's bleeding below this point. And he seems like he's enjoying this very much. So sorry, Scott. Yeah. Say his gun misfired or something. So I'm just going to put a simple granny knot, overhand knot, whatever you guys are used to. And then I'm going to put Scott's pin, pocket knife, whatever I've got right here, lateral with his arm. Can you guys see that? And then all I'm doing is really simple. I'm just going to tie this into 2 granny knots or a double knot or whatever you want to call it. I won't do this second knot tight or we won't be able to get it off without cutting it. So now, technically Scott has a tourniquet. So right now I can find Scott's pulse and I'm going to start tightening this much like I did on the officer's arm. And when I lose his pulse, then I know my tourniquet's good or this bleeding stops. Does that make sense? Depending on where the bleed is, that's why we're saying both. Obviously, if Scott's squirting out right here, we're going to be watching to make sure Scott stops squirting because that's a big deal. We don't want him to lose blood. But this is how you would do it if you're just out there by yourselves and it's just the 2 of you and you have nothing but, don't use wire or anything like that. You won't capture a tourniquet with baling wire. It won't work. It'll just cut him.